So I'm Sarah Hauer. I'm a second-year graduate student here in the College of Communication, and I'm here to introduce to you all Raquel Rutledge. She's been a reporter at the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel for more than 10 years, and during that time, she's covered taxes, City Hall, and even baby wipes. Her reporting doesn't really follow a certain track, but rather she just follows her curiosities, and she's been pretty successful in following those curiosities. In 2010, she was awarded journalism's highest honor. She won the Pulitzer Prize for her series Cashing In on Kids, which exposed widespread problems in the state's child care subsidy program, which was just draining tens of millions of dollars from the state. And that's just the beginning of Raquel's awards for investigative reporting. Now, I kind of wanted to tell you guys a little bit about the first time I met Raquel. I'm not sure if she remembers the first time meeting me, but it was a few years ago when I was interning at a TV station here in town, and a group of reporters were all just standing outside this church waiting for a press conference to begin, and we were all just standing around chatting. I don't really remember what was said, but I knew that Raquel was the kind of reporter that I wanted to be. She was tenacious and curious, and most importantly, she was just fun. Little did I know that I would come back to Marquette for graduate school and be able to work with Raquel for the last year and learn a lot while creating this series, Gasping for Action. She taught us that, the only reason you need to ask a question is just curiosity, and that gummy worms can be a performance-enhancing drug in journalism. And most importantly, she taught us all just to not be boring and to have fun and to really love what you do. Today she'll share with us her work on Gasping for Action, which focuses on this chemical diacetyl, which when inhaled really just obliterates lungs and can have detrimental impact upon people's lives. So, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Raquel.
Well, thank you so much, Sarah. Gosh, those are very kind words, and I will hope not to bore you. But I will tell you right now that I woke up with some crazy allergy, so I'm not crying when I'm up here. I mean, I might, but I'm not right now. So I don't know what's going on, but my eyes are dripping, and I don't usually have allergies, so this is new to me, so I might react in a strange way. We don't know. But first of all, thank you so much to the Freshettes and to the Diedrich College of Communication for making this happen. I could not tell you how thrilled I am to have been a part of this. And one of the best things about it has been my students. And it's been the most surprising thing to me because I had no idea what to expect. We've had interns at the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, and some are good and some aren't quite up to snuff and aren't, I guess, what's the word I want to say? They're just not kind of where you want them to be all the time. So when I came into Marquette, I was not sure at all what to expect out of the students. And I had two graduate students, 3 undergrads, and they have just been the most fantastic people to work with that I could ever have hoped for. They followed through with everything they said they were going to do. They showed up on time. They just did all the work they said they were going to, and they went beyond. And they were there every time they said, if you need something, I'm here for you. I mean, I can't tell you how many times they said that to me. They were just the best. So that was awesome. So I'm going to tell you a little bit. I'm just going to kind of take you through how we even got started on this whole project, because there were some challenges along the way. We set out to write about something I knew about in the food supply, the FDA's oversight of food. I had come across some information about there's this little loophole in the regulation that allows these additives to get in your food supply with very little regulation. So if you pick up a box of cereal, you look at the ingredients, you think, it's all been it's been scrutinized. There's testing. It's safe to eat if it's in your food. Most people would imagine that would be true, right? Well, it's not. That is not true. There is a generally recognized as safe clause in the FDA's regulation, and so all these big food companies were using that loophole to get these additives into the food supply. So thousands of them with very little regulation whatsoever. The science behind them, very sketchy, unknown, often done by the companies manufacturing the food. So I thought that is going to be a great story. I'm really excited about it. And so I ended up going to do a fellowship at Harvard. And we talked about yesterday, the whole idea of going to the law school. And I took a class at the law school that was on nothing but FDA regulation. It was taught by a guy who had been a former FDA regulator, who now was a consultant, knew about how pharmaceuticals get approved. And I spent the whole year working with, working on that, and then talking to the guy who has spent his career trying to get trans fats out of the food supply, Walt Willett, in the School of Public Health. So I was all excited to do that story. So I came back after a year there and got tangled up in a couple of other stories along the way. Didn't quite get to that story. Some other things happened, investigative stories. The ATF started doing some crazy stuff, doing undercover storefronts and trying to buy guns and drugs, and I had to get involved in that investigation. And then a tax story came my way, and I got in that. And so I just never got to the food story. Well, then I learned about this beautiful opportunity from the OBrien Fellowship, and I thought, this is perfect. I finally am going to get to do this story, and everyone's going to learn about what's going on in their food, and it's going to be fantastic, because nobody was really writing about it. So that's about a year ago. It was August 17th, to be exact, on our first day at the fellowship, when what shows up, and you can't see, from this slide. Well, if you look at the top very closely, in the Washington Post on the first day of the fellowship, was the very story that I had intended to do for the whole year. You see down at the bottom, August 17th. I was not excited about that. I was distraught, to say the least. I was not. The Washington Post. So I was panicked, and I thought, what am I going to do? This is very worrisome. And there comes Herb. Herb blows like, it's fine, don't worry about it. The students are going to love you anyway. You're going to come up with something. Just relax. It's all good. Okay. I was not so sure. And George was not so sure. He was quite upset at the Washington Post, as was I. What are they doing with my story? And then comes the voice of reason. Greg Borowski comes in. And he said, you know what, this is him totally. He's like, it's going to be fine. Let's just reframe. Let's think about how else we can tell it. Because the Washington Post, they did a fine job. They did a nice job. There wasn't anything I was going to do that was going to really go deeper beyond that. So we started thinking, all right, what angles can we do? So we brainstormed and thought. And then, thankfully, we have these folks that came into the picture, these fabulous students, Kelly Meyer-Huffer, Xiao Li, they are not with us today. Xiao has moved to California. And Alyssa is here, Alyssa Vobro, fabulous student of mine. And Robin St. John, she was here last night but couldn't be here today. And the beautiful, wonderful Sarah Hauer. So these guys, we all just started thinking, okay, so what are we going to do? Because they had kind of signed on for that food project too. And they were like, I don't know if I'm going to be interested in working with you on this. But we started going through. We decided we were going to look at, let's try to be specific and look at specific chemicals and specific things that might be causing obesity or diabetes. And maybe we can find out what science has done on some of these chemicals, what studies do exist. So we launched out and we had a list of chemicals. We had a list of chemicals that we knew from were flavors. And I thought, well, we could focus on flavors. I mean, we're grasping at things, trying to figure out what we're going to do. So we focused on flavors, and there was a list of flavors that's put out by the Flavors Manufacturers Association. And there are some that are known to be respiratory hazards, but there's very little science on a lot of them. These things what little has been done is mostly on eating them, on ingesting them. So there isn't a lot out there, but we just kind of kept plugging away. And what did we... Oh, yeah, we just were, researching, digging around, and there we are at work in my little office, which was awesome. And we came across a lawsuit. So we were looking through lawsuits. We were looking, really turning over everything we could find in terms of scientific studies on what these chemicals were. And we came across this diacetyl. And my initial reaction was, let's not do diacetyl. I had written about diacetyl. I was familiar with it. I was like, that story's been told. That is the chemical that you might be familiar with, is the popcorn worker's lung chemical. That's the one that's used to flavor microwave popcorn. And back in the early 2000s, mid-2000s, there were a lot of stories nationwide. That chemical was causing the workers to get this dreaded lung disease. It's called bronchiolitis obliterans. It destroys your lungs. It's irreversible. Once you get it, it's basically like scar tissue. And so there's no drug or anything that that fixes it. So I kind of wanted to stay away from it. But as we looked a little closer at it, we realized that these folks that were that had filed this lawsuit in recent years were coffee workers. They worked in the coffee roasting business. And I started thinking, gosh, that is interesting, especially given all the new coffee roasting, cafes cropping up everywhere. People are roasting right in front of you. That's the latest. It's the boutique roasteries. That's the latest craze. And so I started being curious about, I want to know more. So that was 2006 when I first learned about diacetyl. And so, like I said, when I saw it in the Texas coffee roasters, I thought, well, how could that still be possible? How is it that in 2006 it was known to be this dangerous chemical out there, and then here we're going to have 5 coffee roasters in Texas that have dreaded lung disease? Why hasn't there been something done? What's happened along the way? So it was really interesting when we went back to look at all the OSHA, like how OSHA functions and how OSHA is broken, actually, it turns out. One of the most outspoken advocates for getting diacetyl regulated back in 2006 was a guy named David Michaels, and he worked at George Washington University. And he and 42 other public health experts back then signed a letter calling on OSHA to do something, emergency regulation. Let's jump in here and get something done about it. Well, so interesting. So in 2009, it turns out David Michaels is now a secretary at the Department of Labor. He's a guy that actually is in OSHA, and he can get something done, you think. Like, he's the guy that wanted to have it done. Now he's in a regulatory position capable of making something happen. And no, he hasn't done it. So what has gone wrong? What has happened over the years that makes it impossible to get a regulation passed on a chemical known to be causing disease? And so I had written, this is just the story that I'd written in 2006 about diacetyl. When I had first come across it, this was a microwave popcorn worker who had gotten sick working in flavors, playing basketball one day, and he's sweating, and he just had orange sweat coming off of him, and he couldn't figure out what was going on with him. Well, it turned out he had lung disease as well from that. So I realized that this is a serious disease, having trouble getting regulated. So this is the coffee factory, Distant Lands, in Tyler, Texas, where the 5 coffee workers were in 2012. They just settled their lawsuit last year in 2014. So it was amazing to me, again, the lack of action. So Robin St. James, one of our students, and I went down to Tyler, Texas, to talk to the Texas coffee roasters and find out, hear what they had to say. That is Jill Isabel Cerda. She was on a waiting list for a lung transplant. So this is not just a little cough or a little hack. I mean, she's down to like 25% of her lung capacity. Her lifespan is expected to be dramatically reduced from this disease. Her 15-year-old daughter was trying to take care of her. She was bedridden for months and months. She'd worked, the thing about her too, fit, healthy. She was in her mid-30s when she started working at the Texas Coffee Roastery, and non-smoker, just a healthy person. She'd only worked there for a couple of years when she noticed she could not breathe anymore. It was like, just terrible. So her 15-year-old daughter was trying to care for her, and we talked to her 15-year-old daughter. Robin was a huge asset to have with me as a student down there because she speaks Spanish. And so going back to our discussions yesterday about the advantages of speaking different languages, for sure. So Robin we had a translator already down there, but we also had Robin as our backup, confirming that we were getting good translation. So that was a neat opportunity for her. This is Emmanuel Diaz de Leon. He's another one of the coffee workers, and we just heard what it's meant for them, how it's changed their lives. Same thing, mid-30s, non-smoker, healthy. He'd only been there 18 months, and he had come. He moved his family from Mexico. He's born in the United States, born in Chicago, but he and his wife came back here. He's a college-educated guy who was running a grocery business in Mexico and just was wanting a better life for his family, who they were threatened by the cartel and money was being extorted. And he just said, forget it, come into the U.S. And he was willing to do anything. He worked his butt off, really hard worker, just schlepping coffee bags, taking out the trash, was willing to do anything. And then they promoted him to the flavoring room, where he was able to pour the flavors and mix the coffee, and that was a promotion. He was getting almost $11 an hour, and he was really excited about that. And then within 18 months, he was disabled. So I think we're going to get to, oops.
I'm trying to move the product, and when I go to the letter, when go on the second level, I can breathe normal, and my body stop. You feel like short circuits. ¿Cómo?
Short circuit?
Circuits, sí, como cortos circuitos así. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Like shocks?
Shocks. My partner, Julie, she told me something, but the truth, I don't believe it. But I'm just going home, I'm checking the computer, oh my goodness, start to compare the symptoms with my symptoms, and I'm thinking, oh my God, maybe this is something bad. Before I have this problem, I go to the park, play football, play everything with my kids. My kids is very, they have a lot of sports. Yeah, I like the sports. And go together and play. Right now, I'm only go with them. I'm seeing only see they play, or I can do nothing.
I still feel like he has lost the capacity that he has to be happy. He used to be always happy, and now he suddenly has changes from being happy to being upset or to be depressed.
I feel bad every day. All day have pain. All day have pain right here. Esa es la razón por que quiero luchar para no sentirme mal.
¿Cómo?
Que esa es la razón que quiero luchar para no sentirme mal. Mis hijos y ella.
So that's the reason that I keep fighting to not feel bad, is for my kids and for my wife.
Pero todos los días tengo dolor, todos los días algo me siento diferente.
Every day I have pain. Every day something feels different.
So again, he came to the United States, like a lot of folks, a lot of workers that just expect, kind of like we expect our food to be healthy and safe, you expect when you go into a workplace that you have safe environments. Like they had never thought, July Isabel Cerda and Emmanuel Diaz de Leon never imagined that it would be the coffee. They never thought that it would be something, they didn't make any kind of connection with their employment ever. They didn't think that would be. And when they sought help, they were misdiagnosed a bunch of times for, gosh, a year and a half or so. Doctors said, you have bronchitis, you've got asthma, and then this guy, James Stocks, is just a pulmonologist in Tyler, Texas, who happened to see Emmanuel and ask him, hey, what do you do every day? You know, what are you working with? What kind of chemicals and what? And he just said, well, I'm working with coffee. You know, and he didn't think anything of coffee either. He hadn't heard of any issues with coffee workers. It wasn't out there. No one knew. But he said, you know what? Can you bring me your MSDS sheets, those material safety data sheets? Just bring me those sheets that your employer should give you to let you know if there's any hazards that you're dealing with. So he did. He brought those sheets back, and James Stocks was looking at them, and he recognized the word diacetyl. He'd seen it before. He'd read the popcorn stories, and he had seen it. You know, he's a pulmonologist, so he was familiar with it, and immediately he thought, oh man, okay, this could be something very serious. and they did lung biopsies. They did a biopsy, and they found the bronchiolitis obliterans. That never would have been found. It's very hard. It's a rare disease as it is, and it's often misdiagnosed. Very hard to find. So it's just by happenstance that you've got a doctor who asked that question and pursued it. And so then he was able to diagnose the 4 others in that plant. So Julissa Belcerda, same thing, biopsy for her, same disease, 3 others. And it was the first time they had seen that in coffee workers. But again, there was no huge alert to the rest of the world to say, coffee workers, be careful, look out, there could be some chemicals, there's some precautions you might want to take. Doesn't mean you can't work in the industry, doesn't mean you have to quit roasting coffee. It's just there are things you can do to mitigate your exposure. None of that happened, though. Didn't happen. It just, the CDC wrote up a little report, and it sort of stayed in its little space, and the few health experts in the world looked at it, but it didn't get the mass attention. Around the same time that the students and I were working on that, we also realized that diacetyl was in e-liquids, those cartridges that people use to vape. Vaping is now becoming popular, as you're probably aware, and lots is being marketed as a much safer alternative to conventional cigarettes. The science is really inconclusive at this point. There are people that debate. I mean, it's a hot debate with experts all around the world weighing in on really how much better is it. The UK came out with a study in the last 6 or 8 weeks declaring it was 95% safer for sure, to smoke e-cigarettes or vape. And that was immediately discredited by the British Medical Journal, Lancet. Huge health experts and heavyweights around the world said, what kind of science are you basing that on to come up with 95%? Where did you come up with that? And it turned out it was like 12 people in a room that did a survey, and they acknowledged later that they had very little evidence on anything. They didn't know the harms of the nicotine. They didn't know, but it made headlines around the world. You guys might remember it. I mean, it was hugely criticized shortly thereafter, but nobody really paid attention to that. And Brandon, from covering science like this, when you were saying earlier about, between scientists say 5% to 35% on their estimations, and that's what you're dealing with. That's why, as journalists, it's so important to be able to ask the questions, to recognize, not just immediately go with the study. All those folks that ran that story about the 95% safer, I mean, where are the journalists that are saying, look, let's dig a little bit deeper, and what are you basing that on? And so there's just far too few of us that are asking those questions, I think. So I think it's really important to pay attention and not just get caught up in the daily hype of that. If so-and-so says it, then it must be true. It's not so. So these vape shops are opening up all around. I'm sure you guys have noticed them. We found that diacetyl is in them, in some of them. There's a guy in Greece who studied, he bought a sample of 159 of these things from 7 different countries, 36 manufacturers, and tested them and found diacetyl was in almost 70% of them. And that's going straight into your lungs. So it's amazing because, again, people don't know. It's quite the trend at the moment. So anyway, the students and I thought this was an important aspect, and so they went out, Sarah and Alyssa and Shayo and Robin too, I think, got into that part of it. But they went out and talked to people who vaped, and then we thought, what we should do is, how popular is this among Marquette students? And so we wrote a survey, and we were able to send it out with the help of Dr. Bob, who is here. And we so appreciate his participation in making sure that our methods were scientifically valid, statistically valid. It wasn't just a survey on the man on the street type survey. We wanted to actually get a real feel for how students were viewing the vaping and how popular is it really. And so we had more than 700 respondents, which is a pretty good response. I think we sent out maybe 3,000, and of that, I could be wrong, but I think it's around 3,000. I think 700 and some responded, and we got their perspectives on vaping and how often they do it, et cetera. But I'm not going to tell you that right now because that's a story that's going to be running on Wednesday. We haven't published it yet. It was supposed to run last weekend, but I couldn't pull it together. So it's coming. But it's quite interesting. And what we also did then, too, will be in that upcoming story, is we decided we would send out some of the samples. We went around and randomly bought some ourselves to say, because, people are making these in their basements, and they're making them in their garages, and they're just mixing these things up and selling them to these little stores, these little vape shops. And again, people think they're regulated. People think, oh, if it's on the shelf and it's in a legitimate store, it must be safe. Someone's tested it, right? No, it is not true. They're totally unregulated, totally. And that's one of the questions we ask the students too. We have Sarah did a great video, and Alyssa, they talk to people, hey, are e-cigarettes regulated? And everyone's like, I think so, yeah. Oh, yeah, they are. You just got all these different reactions from kids. I don't know. They don't know. No one knows. So it's amazing. But so we took those samples out. We thought we would test them from the local vape shops and see how those turned up. Did they have diacetyl? Did they have any other chemicals in them? And that we found out some interesting things too. Read the paper on Wednesday because that's going to be in there. So basically, we had two components of this story kind of going at once: it's coffee and e-cigarettes. It's like the vice beat, I guess. I mean, they go together perfectly, coffee and cigarettes. So the other thing that came up with the coffee was, so the coffee workers in Texas get sick, but one little thing that I learned in researching that is that it wasn't just the flavors. And this is what made the story really interesting, I think, that got me kind of fired up about it. It wasn't just the added flavor in the coffee that was creating the lung disease or creating the diacetyl. It actually is created from roasting, just simply from roasting, and then when you grind it, the surface area increases and it just releases a lot more into the air from grinding. So that's kind of a big deal, since lots of folks are roasting and grinding coffee. I mean, and I'm also talking about in a commercial setting, though. Yes, people want to know if I grind my own coffee at home, which I do every day, which is maybe why I'm crying up here with allergies. No, I'm kidding. It's not, I don't believe that, so don't worry. But if you do mass quantities and you spend every day in a facility that's roasting, grinding all the time, you are exposed to diacetyl. Now, there are things that can be done. You might have really good ventilation in there. They might have really good exhaust, pulling the air down away from your face. So you might not have. So it's really hard to know. You can't walk into like Colectivo or Stone Creek. You can't walk in there and know just by looking in the air. So we thought it would be really great to just do some testing. Like, let's go in and see what's going on in these places. Now, trying to convince companies to let us get in there and like test their air, they were not really excited about it. They not really. So most people are like, never heard of it. It's not a problem for us. Most people said I've never heard of it. Now, diacetyl it's naturally formed when you brew beer and in wine. It's a product of fermentation. So some folks in the brewing business have heard of it because it can actually kind of taint your beer and stuff. But the coffee roasters really hadn't heard of it. And when I sort of explained it to them, they said, well, we don't use flavors. And I said, listen, I'm sure you don't, but I'm trying to explain to you that it's not just the flavors. And so I had to kind of explain to them. They didn't want to hear it. I mean, it's like, you're just always the bearer of bad news. I'm sorry, but nobody wants to know that. But there were 2 coffee roasters in Wisconsin that did let us come in. So that was really exciting. There was a company in Madison called Just Coffee Cooperative. And they are all about, the reason I chose them to ask in the first place is because their philosophy is transparency, number one, was one of their big things. And then also they were founded in the beginning just because they were worried about workers in Mexico being exploited. So if you're talking to me about caring about your workers in Mexico, then you care about your employees. And I kind of just said, you let us in there. So they did. And then there was another one in Milwaukee called Valentine Coffee, and said the same thing to them. I just said, let's just see. I said, it might be fine. I went into Just Coffee. We went in there, and it looks great. It's huge. It's open, spacious, and airy, and you don't smell anything. It's not steamy. It's not smoky. It's not dirty. You would never know. You just walk in and go. You hardly even smell the coffee. At least I didn't even really smell it. So I really did not expect that we would find anything in that place or in the other place. So we hired an industrial hygienist who is familiar with diacetyl, knows how to do the testing, so it was solid. It wasn't going to be me in there trying to figure out how to capture some air. That was good. So we got him in there, we did it, hooked him up, and the numbers came back high. They came back 4 times higher than what the CDC says is possibly, what their risk is for workers, for people that are exposed every day. they said, you know, you're 4 times higher on the people that are grinding especially. So amazing. And these numbers that we found in there were on par with some of those that had made the workers sick in the microwave popcorn plant. They weren't astronomical like some of the flavors, but there were workers in the microwave popcorn plants that were exposed to those similar levels that had obstructed lung disease from that. So we wrote that story. It slowly sort of got caught on a little bit. A lot of people still were in denial, still didn't believe it. Well, that was only 2 roasteries. That wasn't peer reviewed. Or, you know, you could have been, you know, that could be an anomaly. And it's true, because you could have really good ventilation in a place. You might, and you don't know. You know, so you don't know unless you test. So, but shortly after we wrote that, there was another study that came out by some scientists that basically they represent chemical companies a lot. They represent the flavor manufacturers, and they would love to be able to show that it's not just the added flavor, that it's other things. So, because there were a ton of lawsuits around the time of the popcorn workers, that's actually kind of what prompted a lot of the change, is people were being sued for millions and millions of dollars. There's settlements that are over $100 million, and that really kind of shifted that industry. So that industry, they'd love to say, it wasn't us, it was actually your coffee, you know. So anyway, there's scientists that come in from that perspective. They did a coffee shop, found similar levels to us. So no one's denying anymore. Well, I shouldn't say no one, but people are starting to recognize that, yes, it's in this business. It is in the unflavored coffee business, and it's a threat. It's a threat to workers. So let me think about where else I am with that. So that's the latest where we are with the coffee roasting thing, I believe. Oh yeah, let's can we run that video? It's just a quick little 2 or 3 minute video, I think. Yeah, because this will show you inside of that coffee plant.
This is Just Coffee Cooperative. We are testing the air quality of our facility, particularly around the roasting process and around the grinding process.
Well, I'm Gene Ringer, and I'm representing Industrial Hygiene System, and we're doing the air monitoring for the diacetyl to determine what the employees might be exposed to as they're working with coffee.
Today we had a person come in and inspect the air quality here around both of the roasters. We were hooked up with some sort of a probe and a vial that sucked air out of the atmosphere around us.
What do you think? It works so far. I mean,
Diacetyl and 2,3-pentadione are found in coffee and they're found in butter. So it's the question is if there's sufficient here to cause damage.
I was unaware that there was even an issue in the industry, and so for us this is really interesting to see how we rate, but maybe more importantly, making sure that our employees are safe who are working here.
We're going to stick this on you so that it, as best we can, represents the air that you're breathing in through your nose.
Diacetyl causes a lung disease. It causes your bronchioles to, I shouldn't use the word disintegrate, but essentially they break down. It's a very strong irritant.
So for us, this is a really great opportunity to look at something that seems to be emerging within the coffee industry as a problem and making sure that we don't have issues here, and if we do have issues here, to correct those issues as quickly and efficiently as we can.
I thought it was a good idea because I would like to know what I'm being exposed to. This is my career. I've been doing it over a decade, and I am concerned about my health in the future.
Everyone has really approached it with a very healthy curiosity. I think we all know just from working here every day, nobody's going home sick. From what I know of these issues within the industry, the people who are working here, I think we'd see it by now. But maybe we wouldn't. And obviously everyone wants to know for their own curiosity and for their own safety, want to make sure the conditions are good here. So
it's a permanent damage that's caused to the lungs. The only cure for it is a lung transplant, which isn't a very common transplant.
I imagine that if it turns out that there's a borderline problem or there is a problem, I would hope that we do a little bit more testing just to make sure that the test results are what we feel like they are.
Companies need to be proactive and figure out what their employees might be exposed to try to keep them safe.
If the results were bad, that would have consequences for the entire coffee industry, not just here where I work. I like doing what I do. It's my passion life, so I hope I can continue doing that. Yeah.
So one of the things he said, what I think is really interesting too, is just about the idea that, hey, this would have shown up by now, that we would have seen it by now. Where are all the dead coffee roasters? That's the next logical question, right? Where are all the sick coffee roasters? Well, epidemiologists will tell you to a T, to every one of them, that we have completely an inadequate occupational surveillance system in this country. They're not tracking disease by occupation. There's a movement now at the federal level to include that. So like when you go and check in at your doctor's appointment, whatever, that they will ask you, what's your, not just where you work as they do for your insurance company, but actually what is your occupation? So that they can have a big database, and later on, if you want to be able to spot trends and find things that are problematic, at least you have somewhere to work, and you can start to see industries where there are problems. So the fact that they are, you're not seeing them, also they are misdiagnosed, as I said earlier, often with bronchitis, asthma, blah, blah. So we started we put out a call to say to coffee roasters, hey, we're interested in hearing from you, and what sort of, if anything, are you, any sort of respiratory symptoms? A lot of times, the microwave popcorn workers, 25% of them had no symptoms. But when they were tested later, they had the spirometry tests, they had obstructed lung disease and did not know it. So it's not something that might knock you over. It's not that you might recognize right away. It takes a little bit of time sometimes to develop. And so there's all kinds of reasons why you're not seeing yet a big epidemic of sick coffee roasters. But as they start to track it, as they start to pay attention, as we start to ask questions, I have no doubt that you will find some of them, because it's not a joke. It's actually happening in the CDC. So this just came out the other day. We wrote a story about this. The CDC finally put out a notice alerting coffee roasters to say, hey, here's what happens. Here's what's going on in your industry. Here's ways you need to test the air. Here's things you can do to protect yourself. Nobody wants to wear those respirators, especially a lot of the coffee roasters are kind of bearded guys, not stereotypically, but a lot they are. And nobody wants to wear the big, hot, heavy respirators. But I mean, that is the last resort. If you can't get it out of the air from new ventilation, exhaust, then at least that is something you can do. So again, it doesn't have to be the end of your coffee roasting business, but there are precautions you can take. So that was the first step for the CDC to take. We're waiting for them. They actually did go into Just Coffee. So they have free programs where they will come in and they will test for you. You have to agree to fix the stuff, though. So a lot of the employers are a little hesitant to do that because they're a little bit worried that, hey, is this going to be really costly to fix this? If you guys find a bunch of problems, are we going to be able to afford it to fix it? But OSHA and NIOSH, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, their research arm, will come in and do a survey and test your workers for their health and test the risk and let you know. So it can be free. The assessment's free, but you just have to agree to fix it. So there have been a number of companies around the country that are taking advantage of that. And so we're waiting to hear what the results are of those. So that's this is still a project in process. And we will see we're going to get those results in the next couple of weeks, actually, out of Just Coffee. So they're full evaluation. So more will be revealed for sure on Wednesday. George will be happy to hear that. and then as we get more information. So, questions? Yes. Oh yeah, mic for you. Sorry. Sorry.
Thank you. The question is, where does the drug or this chemical, I should say, come from? Is it in the bean?
Yeah.
Is it in the popcorn? I mean,
No. Nope. Good question. So it's a byproduct of fermentation. So when you heat sugars and fats, lots of any sugars and fats almost will create a diacetyl. So it is in butter, it's in yogurt, it's in anything that ferments like that. It's not. So you can imagine. There's lots of other industries that this would impact. There was a study done back in 2007 on short order cooks because they're dealing with a lot of butter heated right in their face all the time, and they found high levels around them. Again, it's like little pockets of industries where there's no big concerted effort to say, we got to find out where it is everywhere and approach it from a bigger perspective like that. But it is, again, and it's actually okay, they say, to eat it a little bit. Like if you have a little bit and eat it, that's fine. It's a totally different story when you're breathing it in. Inhaling it is completely a different insult to the lungs.
So you're saying coffee beans have fat?
Yeah. Yeah. What else?
Hi, Raquel. Thank you for that wonderful and very instructive presentation. One of the questions that I have is regarding the rampant use of e-cigarettes and how especially the youth now is really turning to this form of electronic vaping and all these vaping contests. I know friends of mine even in different universities are allowed to take them into classrooms, and you see just clouds throughout the classrooms because they're allowed to, since it's not a actual cigarette. So what are the dangers that this poses to the youth, and what can be done about this from your understanding?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question about what the dangers are. I mean, the science is not done on that, so you won't know what the dangers are of that for another 10 years probably. But we do know from the American Poison Control Center, we've got some of their data, and that's going to come in my story on Wednesday too. I think I have to add that, Greg. I got to add that. Thank you. Okay. But they have gotten a lot of calls from people who have just kind of been sitting in classrooms or in public spaces that are inhaling that and that are having reactions. So, everybody's different though. So people have sensitivities to smells and fragrances and different things. So it's not going to necessarily affect everybody, but there are people certainly that are having reactions to that. And then, as you know, I mean, they're just very local municipal regulations, state, county by county, city by city, state by state, on whether you can vape inside or where you can't vape inside. So it's, again, unregulated. So you don't really know. And not all of them have. And we only looked at a couple of chemicals. There's a lot of other chemicals in there we don't know. Propylene glycol is one of the big bases for the almost every e-liquid is made with either vegetable glycerin or propylene glycol. And propylene glycol is that stuff that's theater smoke, that white stuff that they use on stage. That there are some lawsuits regarding that where people have been have claimed that their injury to their lungs as a result of that. So the real answer is it's unknown. Now, really quick to just tell you one more thing about it. There is that one scientist that I was telling you from Greece who tested all those. He likes to he's trying to figure out how to say how dangerous they are. He's trying to say, well, there are no rules. We don't know anything. So let's compare it to the occupational exposure from the microwave popcorn workers. Does that make sense? So, is 5 parts per million in the air, is that dangerous compared to what you hit when you vape? So the scientists are totally out there arguing about what the legitimate way is to actually measure the risk on this stuff. So it's really unknown. No great answers. Yes. Sorry,
I'm
I didn't see
curious
you.
about the flavoring industry, where clearly a short amount of time and exposure to these people cause probably deadly results. So has that industry done anything, or the government done anything to improve the situation in that industry?
In the flavoring industry?
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, it was the lawsuits, I think, that really kind of rattled people and started to make them aware. And there are respirators used more frequently. It's not resolved, though. I mean, I've interviewed flavor workers where they said there's nothing in their business that they don't know about the hazards. So I think it's gotten better. You've seen a little dip in the number of lawsuits, class action suits, filed against various big flavoring manufacturers, dropping off. But there have been some improvements for sure. It's gotten slightly better. I mean, that's just my assessment but it's not over. The Flavor Manufacturers Association, they would say, yes, we have educated, we have tried to educate our members, we've put the word out, we have repeatedly said, here's ways to reduce it, and getting respirators on those folks for sure, and better ventilation. So I think it's improved, but it's not fixed. Yeah. Okay. All right. Yes. Yep.
Could you talk a little bit about the challenges as a journalist about writing a story that has some significant, weighty scientific evidence that you have to present for a more generally educated public audience, and how you find the sweet spot when you try to do that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I mentioned it yesterday because I said it's about to do me in. It is complicated. So, but you have to understand it. So, like, my job is to understand it and spend more time than my editors would like, probably, figuring out how the scientists look at it. How are they measuring it? How are they looking at it? How are they testing for it? What are they doing? And for me to understand that, I just have to talk to a zillion people, more than I'm ever going to use in my story. I mean, I will talk to so many more people than you will ever see. And I will read so much stuff that's not going to be in there, because I don't think you guys want to get way into the weeds on this stuff. I mean, I was just about to go in the weeds a second ago when we were talking about parts per million. I was like, no, you don't want to hear that probably, right? Nobody wants to really, I don't know. So you try to keep it at a level that's just, I mean, it's kind of by, editors read it and look at it and say, is that too much, or is that just enough? It's kind of, it's a tricky thing to write about, for sure. And how much, but I started thinking about this too. It's kind of like advertising in some ways. If somebody's selling tires to you, and if they're going to talk to you for a minute, if a minute advertisement or a 30-second advertisement, if you don't need tires, if you're not in the market for buying new tires for your car, you don't care. You don't care. You're not going to look at it. But if you are, you're going to listen to it. So I kind of look at it that way with this kind of a story. People can read the top, and they'll get the gist of it. And they'll like, okay, I'm curious. But people who vape, or people who work in the roasting business, and people who care about it, they will read every word of that, and they will care about the 5 parts per million versus 25, right? But if they don't, then they'll just get the summary. So try to give you enough to make it important, and to share new information and what can be meaningful and impactful and matter, and then just a little bit enough for the folks that aren't going to go that deep.
So I know that Just Coffee just was being evaluated, but have they done anything in the interim to change their ventilation or processes? And when you go to a place like Colectivo on Humboldt, do you have any sense of how well they ventilate their coffee roasting area?
Yeah, I don't have any. To answer your first question, yes, Just Coffee immediately got some better airflow in there right off the bat. And they don't. I think they changed their grinder. They had a grinder that was, if you try to enclose the processes better, you can keep it in better. So they've gotten a new grinder, and then they're waiting to hear what the experts say about, hey, okay, here's some engineering controls you can take. But the Colectivo folks, I don't have a great sense. I've interviewed some of their workers, and that's coming in a future story as well. Again, given the surprise that I felt going in the other 2 places, which I would never have expected anything from the lack of smell and lack of anything visible, and so I would not be surprised if I had gotten in there. Maybe they've been able to fix some stuff. Like they said they were going to do their own internal testing. They wouldn't tell me if they were going to test for these chemicals, and they wouldn't tell me if they would share the information with me. So they've just been kind of a little bit sort of standoffish. They don't want to hear it. And they just assure us that they're going to be looking out for the workers. So I really don't know. Can't say. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, everyone.